Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Danielle and I'm the owner of Damn Fancy Creations and the Drunk Flamingo. In today's tutorial, we're going to be using a few different techniques to create this fun snake tumbler, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. Everything you see listed here will be covered in today's tutorial, but if you guys have questions, please ask below, or you can ask in one of my tutorial groups that are on Facebook, and I will be happy to answer them. Before we get started on this tutorial, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any upcoming tutorials. Also, don't forget to check the description where I list all items needed to recreate this tumbler, as well as discount codes from my favorite suppliers. If y'all are ready, let's jump into this tutorial and get started. Alright y'all, so the first thing we're going to do is apply a layer of epoxy to a prepped tumbler that is spray painted white. I like to use Rust-Oleum matte. It dries quicker and it's just quicker for me to handle and apply my epoxy or glitter, whatever I'm going to be doing to it. Now, most people, when they do the epoxy method, they only use a couple milliliters. I like to use a little bit more than that, so I probably use about 15 milliliters for this 20-ounce tumbler because I like that epoxy to soak up that glitter so that I have a smooth, flat surface. If you use less epoxy, then the glitter is going to kind of sit on top of the epoxy versus the epoxy soaking it up. So it just kind of depends on what look you're going for. So we're going to pop all of our bubbles. This isn't really necessary to do for this layer since it is going to be covered up with glitter, but we're just popping them with my torch. I like to pop bubbles for 2 full rotations. And next we're just going to go in and sprinkle our glitter onto our tumbler. And I'll typically just use a sheet of scrapbook paper and put underneath my tumbler to catch all of my glitter. And we are going to go in with white linen. This was previously a Drunk Flamingo color, but if you guys don't know, I no longer offer glitter, but you can find all of my colors over at Cami Page Boutique's website. She will be linked below. And yes, I already know my glitter is contaminated. I don't think I have one color of glitter that is not contaminated. So we are just going to sprinkle this glitter on. I will typically sprinkle kind of 2 rounds to make sure everything is covered. After this is cured, which will be about 2 hours since I'm using a fast set epoxy, I will apply 2 more layers of epoxy on this tumbler to make sure that everything is smooth and covered, and we don't have any glitter grains that you can feel. And once the second layer has cured, we're going to edge our top and bottom rims of our tumbler. These edging tools are also from Cami Page Boutique. I like to have one blade in the second step up and one blade in the first step up. That way I don't have to switch out my blades. The bottom you do need to cut on the second step, and the top of the tumbler I cut on the first step. And what I typically do is hold my tumbler under the faucet and let hot water run over the edge of the epoxy for about 30 seconds. And once that epoxy is a little warm, I will edge my tumblers. And I will suggest to do this shortly after your epoxy has cured. The longer that your epoxy has to sit and cure, the harder it may be to edge your tumblers. You will see in the top rim, it was a little bit more difficult because this tumbler had sat for probably 4 days versus 1 day, which is when I typically try to edge my cups. But this is just an easy way. You don't have to worry about a Dremel or sanding or anything like that. And usually that epoxy, glitter, and spray paint will come right off. If I had done this sooner, this would have come off in kind of like one long strip, kind of how the bottom of my tumbler did, but it still works, even if you let it sit for a while. And it also helps if you have a fresh blade, which I rarely have. So after I edge my cups, I will just get some acetone and clean those rims to remove any spray paint or glitter that may still be stuck to the tumbler. And the same thing for the top rim. So you guys can see how smooth that is. It just looks so good. Everything is uniform and straight and nice and crisp. So the next thing that we're going to do is apply our foil adhesive. I'm using the foil adhesive from Artistic Painting Studio. This is basically like a tack it. I just prefer the Artistic Painting Studio a little bit better. I feel like it dries a little bit quicker and I get more adhesion using this versus tack it. But obviously you guys can use whatever one you want. And I will do a decent layer. I don't want any globs or really thick areas, but I definitely want to make sure that everything is covered well. And if you have not used foil adhesive before, it does go on white, as you can see, and then it will dry clear. And I would allow for at least 30 minutes for this to dry completely. Sometimes it does take longer depending on how thick your coat is. A lot of times I will use my heat gun to kind of speed up that drying process, but you definitely want to make sure that it's 100% dry before you try to apply your foil. So we can see that this is dry now. We can see the glitter through it. I went ahead and cut my foil sheet to the size that I wanted. I didn't do an exact size. I just kind of cut what would wrap my tumbler. I did have a little bit of overhang just in case I didn't get it wrapped exactly perfect. And I just, since you can't lay this on a cup cradle because it has the foil adhesive on it, I just kind of applied it in the center and then wrapped it around, as you guys could see. And now that it's on there, I'm just going to smooth it down with my little vinyl squeegee. And there are a little bit of creases in there, but that's okay. Don't freak out if you have creases in your foil. You can just use your squeegee and really kind of rub those creases out. And I'm just doing this over the entire tumbler. I want to make sure that that foil is really stuck to that adhesive so that when we pull that adhesive sheet off, it's going to stick to the tumbler or the foil sheet off. And when you're doing this, make sure that you do apply it print side down. So like you're looking at the print, if that makes sense. You don't want to apply it opposite and just have the top part stuck to the tumbler, because then the foil is obviously not going to stick to it. And if you're not sure which side is the pattern, you can always test a little piece to make sure that you're putting the correct side down. So I will just use my squeegee and rub the foil down as good as I can, make sure everything is adhered well to the foil adhesive. And once I think I've done a good job, I will start to remove the film or whatever it's called, the clear part that the pattern is attached to. And I'll start kind of slowly peeling it back, and if I see any parts that are lifting a little bit or maybe didn't stick well, I will just use my fingers or the squeegee again and kind of rub the foil a little bit more into the adhesive like I'm doing here. And I will just do this until I get the film completely pulled off. So you can see that the foil completely came off, almost completely came off. And here's what it looks like after we put the foil on. And I think I applied another layer of epoxy on top of this. So now it's all shiny. And now we're going to work with Culture Sculpt to create our snake. So the first thing I'm going to do is wrap our tumbler in foil. Now the reason I'm wrapping this tumbler versus grabbing a blank tumbler is because this one already has glitter and epoxy on it, so it's a little bit thicker than a blank tumbler, and I want to make sure that my snake is fitted to this exact tumbler and not a blank one. So if you guys have not used Culture Sculpt before, this is a two-part sculpting epoxy. So we're going to get equal amounts. Do not weigh this. That is not how you do it. We are just going to get equal amounts in size and not by weight. Because one of these parts is a lot more dense. One of them is more airy and fluffy. So they are obviously going to weigh different amounts. So I am just getting a size out that I think I'm going to need. I would probably say I got maybe a little bit bigger than a golf ball size of each, and we are just mixing it together. And when I mix my Culture Sculpt, I really kind of fold it into each other. I don't, get my fingers all in it. I just kind of hold it in my hand and fold it into each other. If you guys have watched me use this before, you will know I always quote Schitt's Creek, like folding in the cheese. How do we fold in the cheese, David? I don't know why this reminds me of it. Maybe because I'm folding in the Culture Sculpt. I don't know. But basically, we're going to do this until the colors look even. If you guys have worked with this or saw in my video, one of them is a pure white and one of them is a kind of off-white creamy color. So we want to make sure that all the colors are combined. And I like to use cornstarch. It helps the Culture Sculpt from sticking to my gloves. Sometimes it can get a little sticky after you mix it after a little while. So now I'm just going to roll out his body. I am going to slow this down a little bit so you can see me actually start to form my snake. So I am just rolling this Culture Sculpt in my hand right now. We are just going to make kind of like a log, I guess. So I'm just starting towards the end and kind of working my way up. And I'm just using my mat. This is a mat from Artistry. Epoxy does not stick to it, so you can just pop it off if it gets on there. So I was just kind of rolling it out to test what size I needed. I really wasn't sure how long I needed to make my little snake. And I just pinched off a little section for his head because I knew that I wanted to make that separate. And when you're rolling this out, I would not worry about getting it super smooth or bump free. We can definitely go back and smooth everything out once we actually get the snake on our tumbler. So I am going to take my little snake and I'm just going to start wrapping him around my tumbler. If you guys have worked with Culture Sculpt before, you know that if you just kind of wrap it around there, it's going to fall off. So what I like to do is apply it to my tumbler and kind of press it down a little bit. And I can't really explain it, but when you press the Culture Sculpt down, it's almost like the backside gets a little tacky and grabs onto whatever you're applying it to, if that makes sense. I don't know why it does that, but that's just my experience with it. So I just like to press it down a little bit and just hold it there until that backing of the Culture Sculpt starts to grip. So I'm flattening out this little part right here. This is where his head is going to go. And this is basically just how I form my snake head. So y'all can just kind of watch how I do it. I just make a ball, pinch the front part where his little eyes and cheeks would be, and then flatten his little nose. And then I am going to use some little beads for his eyes. These are just some black beads that I had on hand. And I'm just going to press those into the Culture Sculpt. And we're going to add a little bit of definition to his eyes. So I'm just going to take a little piece and kind of add it to the back part of his eye. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. This way it doesn't look like two random eyeballs just stuck on his face. And I'm just using my tools. I have some silicone tools and then just some plastic tools just to form the Culture Sculpt around his eyes until I'm happy with it. And I'm using cornstarch and my silicone tools to kind of smooth everything out. And I did forget to mention, always use gloves when you're working with Culture Sculpt while you're mixing it. It is a reaction. I did not know this the first time that I used Culture Sculpt. I was one of the first ones to test it, and there wasn't any instructions. It just came in like a random bag, and my hands were on fire after I used it. Now, once it is all mixed and both parts are combined, it's not necessary to wear gloves. Most of the time I do, just out of personal preference, but for something like this, since I am really trying to sculpt this little head, I don't want my gloves to get in the way or cause wrinkles and things like that. But it is safe, once everything is mixed up, to not wear gloves anymore. So I am just working with this little snake head until I'm happy with it. I'm just kind of forming it. If you guys need a visual, you can always pull up a picture of a snake and kind of create his little head based on that. And then I'm just using one of my little tools to kind of form his little mouth. And then I'm using some ball tools to make his little nostrils and some other little details just around his mouth, just to give him a little bit more interest so he's not so plain. And I was pretty happy with how he was looking right now. So I am just going to attach him to his body. And I'm just pushing him down slightly just so his head attaches to the Culture Sculpt that is on the tumbler. And then I'm going to use my silicone tools and kind of blend that together so that his head is really kind of seamless to his body. And once you get his head on there, I just like to take cornstarch and I'm just kind of rubbing it on the snake just to smooth out any bumps. If there are any cracks or creases, you can smooth them out as well. And just so you guys know, Culture Sculpt can be sanded after it's dry. So if there's a big section that you just can't smooth out with the cornstarch or your fingers, don't worry about it because you can kind of smooth it out with sandpaper once everything is cured. Oh, and there's our daily train, y'all. So I'm just going back and opening up his mouth a little bit since I smushed him down on the tumbler. So smoothing out and reshaping. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. It's pretty much the same thing. I just spend a little time smoothing him out so I don't have to do a lot of sanding. And I will leave him here. I like to leave my projects overnight just to make sure that they're cured all the way. Most of the time, your items will be cured in a few hours, but some of my pieces are pretty thick, so I just like to leave them for as long as I can. So once our guy is cured, we are going to come back and add some bubbles and UV resin so he kind of looks like little scales or just some texture for him. Okay, so once he is cured, we are going to carefully take him off of our tumbler. We're going to unwrap the foil and we're just going to slide him off. So now we're going to carefully remove the foil. It does stick to him, so I'm just kind of compressing all of the foil and then carefully peeling it off of the snake. So next I'm going to slide him on my cup. Make sure he fits. He looks pretty good. I was happy with him. And then I was like, maybe I want to apply him to my tumbler like that. But I decided just to keep him this way. So at this point, if you want to go sand him, you can. I sanded him a little bit. We're just going to buff him so he looks a little smooth. So now we are going to apply the bubbles in UV resin. I like to use the Let's Resin UV resin. I think I can get a whole quart, I think it is, for $42 or so. And I really like it because it cures quickly and it really doesn't have that bad of an odor like some other UV resins may. So we are just going to apply a thin but not too thin coat of resin. We're going to blow our bubbles. This is just some Dawn dish soap mixed with water. And then we're going to cure the resin while the bubbles are on there. And then we're going to wipe those bubbles off. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's hard to see since this is clear bubbles on a white snake. And you want your resin layer thick enough so that the bubbles will kind of sink down in to that resin, so that that resin will hold the bubble's shape while it is curing. And I like to do a mix of larger bubbles and smaller bubbles. Sometimes the really tiny bubbles turn out so cute. I did a lot of those for my turtle cup. If you guys have not seen my 3D turtle tumbler that I also use this method on, I will link it here. So we are just going to do this all over the entire snake. So I'm just going to speed this process up a little bit. We're just adding a little bit of resin and putting our bubbles on and curing it. Wiping off the bubbles and repeating the process. And I'm only applying these bubbles and UV resin to the top part of the tumbler, or sorry, the top part of the snake. We don't want to apply the UV resin to the inside of the snake because that would make him thicker and he won't fit on our tumbler. So once you get your snake completely covered with the bubbles and UV resin, we are going to start adding some mica. So I am using white, a little bit of blue, some pink, rose gold, just some random micas that I have. And I'm just going to start going in with a semi-stiff brush and brushing that mica right into the UV resin. I'm not mixing it with anything. If you do mix it with a sealer or something like that, it will make the colors more vibrant, but I did not want my colors very bright. I just wanted them kind of soft and for them to pick up the bubbles. So you guys can see already just from this video that as soon as we put the mica on there, you can really start to see that texture come out. Even with the pearl mica. And I'm just mixing a couple different shades of blue and pinks. And the reason that I did all of this off of my tumbler is because I didn't want to get any of this stuff on my tumbler. Applying the UV resin and the bubbles would kind of come close to the actual tumbler, and I didn't want to risk getting the UV resin onto the tumbler that was basically already complete. So now we're going to get a little bit on his little head. And you can just kind of play with colors until you're happy with how your little snake looks. So I was happy with how he looks. So now we're going to slide him onto our tumbler, and we're going to attach him to the tumbler with a little bit of super glue. This is really just to hold him in place until we get a layer of epoxy over him. So I'm just applying some Gorilla Glue super glue. This is the gel super glue, and I'm just applying it in between the snake and the tumbler. And if you guys need a new tumbler grip, go shop the tumbler grip. This is what they are. I love them. They're magnetic. They're so easy to just pop on and off. So if I need to pull a tumbler off, go spray paint it, I can literally spray paint a tumbler, decorate it, put it on my tumbler, all on the same arm. We do have a discount code for them as well, which is in the comments. And I'm just using some of my little flat tools to get that super glue in between the snake and the tumbler, because it was a very tight fit. So once we have our snake super glued to our tumbler, we are going to go seal all the cracks with UV resin. So this is, again, just a sped up version, but I am just applying this UV resin right to the cracks where the snake meets the tumbler. And I do this with most of my 3D items that I put on tumblers. That way, if there's any air, it's not going to pop out when we're applying epoxy and cause a big air bubble. This also will help seal the snake to the tumbler a lot better than just the super glue. And I work very quickly when I do this. I will apply the UV resin and immediately cure it. That way the UV resin doesn't have a chance to drip underneath the snake and cause uncured resin to be underneath the 3D object or snake, whatever you have on your tumbler. And I know this is out of frame. It will be back, don't worry. Sometimes it's just easier to hold it in my lap. So again, we're just going around the snake and immediately curing that resin. And I just do this all the way around the snake. And I'll work in about 2-3 inches at a time, especially on a curved surface like this, because I don't want the resin to drop down the snake, cause weird little bumps, anything like that. And I will always have my UV light on, just face down on my table like you see here. That way I can just pick it up and immediately cure it. I think I had to cut a little drippy off. Get all the way around his little head. So once I have the edges of the snake covered with UV resin, I'm just going to give him one good coat of UV resin. And I like to do this just to cut down on epoxy layers that I will need. So by applying this layer of UV resin, he is already going to be smoothed out. So we are just going to put a layer over his entire little body. I also like to do this, especially for spaces like his little mouth. Sometimes if we just put a layer of epoxy over it, little spaces like that can release bubbles. So this way, if we already go ahead and seal these little spaces, it will minimize any bubbles that are formed with a regular epoxy layer. So once we get this UV resin cured, we are going to apply one layer of epoxy, and then if we need to sand out any of those UV bubbles, this is when you would sand the snake itself and smooth out the UV resin bubbles that were applied, and then apply your final layer of epoxy. And then we will be ready to apply his little jewels or any other little embellishments that you want to add to the snake itself. So we're just going to let this cure and then epoxy, and then we'll move on to our final step. So here is our tumbler that is completely finished. Now we're just going to add some jewels. And this snake sat forever because I could not decide what I wanted to do to him. I was thinking about adding some flowers and then some rhinestones to the tail or to his body. I just couldn't decide. And then I was at Hobby Lobby and I saw these little pink and purple like sparkly rocks, as well as some larger rectangled rhinestones, and I thought that those were the perfect colors to go with this foil and with the snake. So that's what I decided to go with. And I'm using E6000 to attach these because they do get, the E6000 gets tacky. It dries flexible, so it's not going to be brittle or hard. So I just applied some E6000, and then I'm just arranging my little pink and purple stones and the little rectangle rhinestone beads. And we're just adding them however you want. And I am stacking them so they don't look so flat against the snake. So it kind of looks like he's gathering these little goodies for himself. And I did get these on sale. I think that these were from Michael's, maybe. It was either Michael's or Hobby Lobby, and they were having like a 50% off sale. So I snatched them up. And before you apply these little jewels, you want to make sure that your tumbler is completely finished, because once you apply these, we are not going to epoxy again. So I was happy with how this one was looking, like a little gathered jewels that he has. And I am going to leave him just like this until this dries, and then I am going to add some more jewels to the other section where his tail is, and then he will be finished. So here are some finished pictures of our little snake. I really love how he turned out, and he's so fun. I don't even like snakes, and I think he turned out super cute. Just wrapped around the tumbler. I think his little face is so cute. And these are the other little crystals that he gathered in his tail. But I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have questions, or if you try your own snake tumbler, then please post in my groups. I love to see what inspires you guys and what kind of creations y'all come up with. If y'all enjoyed this tutorial or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my Damn Fancy tutorial group or my Drunk Flamingo group. Both are linked in the description. Thanks for watching.